Okay, here we go. So again, we are going to just go through the strategies that were part of the PDF of the meeting packet for today. And we'll answer those 2 questions that Steve mentioned before, and then end with anything that we're missing, go back to the group and report back. So let's go ahead and start with the first one here under process improvements and permitting process streamlining. C1.
Jackie, could you make your screen, could you zoom in a little bit?
Yeah, of course.
I am finding I'm squinting. Thank you.
Okay, let me get rid of that. Okay, is that better? Awesome, okay. So C-1.1, permit the majority of residential uses through a type 1 review rather than a type 2 review and approval. Clarify the standards and procedures for uses subject to review and approval under the Development Code, Clark County Code 4520-020. So PAG members, anyone want to share any thoughts on this one? Something that you're excited about, something that you're interested in, not so much? Nancy.
I love that idea because I just went through a permitting process for my addition, and that was really hectic, and it was just a very simple build. So I love the idea of encouraging density through an easier permitting process. Am I jumping the gun if I said that we were reading something about having preset plans for review? Is that a different topic?
Yes, that's another strategy that
okay.
We'll be coming up to.
Okay, but I love this idea. Love it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not seeing where I raised my hand. Sure, where do I raise my hand?
Oh, no, go ahead, Phil.
Okay. I like the idea. I just think it's a little more nuanced than basically saying most residential uses as a type 1 rather than a type 2. I think it depends on the complexity. So I think this strategy deserves looking more closely at how particular types of proposals are categorized. So for example, I think type 1 can work for a fourplex, for example, in a zone that allows attached townhomes outright. But if it's a site plan with a few different buildings and parking and everything else, I just don't know if it's realistic to get a staff review complete within 21 days, which I think is the type 1 timeline after fully complete. So I like the idea. I don't think it should be discarded. I think there's always room for process improvements. I just think that it's a little more nuanced than just all type 2s are done as type 1. I don't know if that's feasible.
Thank you, Phil. Anyone else want to weigh in on this one from the advisory group?
If I can add to what Phil said, and though he said he wasn't sure that it was reasonable for all type 2s to go through a type 1 process and specifically mentioned the 21 days, Phil, wouldn't it be amazing if we just simply put the 21 days there as a regulatory requirement?
Yeah, I'm not, I mean, I would love to get through the process in that amount of time. I mean, that's typically more quickly than we get to a fully complete application determination as it stands right now. So absolutely, this is an area that could use some improvement. My concern is that if we put everything into a type 1 and if it's not realistic for staff to get through the review and issue a report in that amount of time, I think it deserves going through and figuring out exactly how that's going to be executed. My concern is that they'll just be essentially throwing out applications rather than taking them in. They'll say, well, we're not going to be able to make a decision on this in 21 days, so we're going to reject this application on a technicality. So, and I think that would be a shame.
Agreed.
Okay, so it sounds like the idea, but need to do a little bit more digging into the specifics and how that would work out depending on the kind of the circumstances of whatever was proposed. So some more work and discussion.
Jackie, what's the magnitude of difference between a type 1 and a type 2 review, right? So how long could type 2?
Type 2, hold on. I do have type 1, like Phil said, is 21. I want to say type 2 is like double that or more.
It's 78 days for a type
Yeah,
2.
okay, 78. So it is all about staff timing and getting the review done. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next one.
Steven's got his hand raised.
Oh, yes, sorry, Steven, go ahead.
That's
Thank you,
okay,
Eric.
thanks. My memory is a little faulty on this, but I think the requirements for notification of adjacent property owners is different between type 1 and type 2. And the question I had was whether adjacent property owners have as much opportunity for comment under a type 1 review. Because I think that's an important issue.
Jose, will you go ahead and unmute yourself and help us out with this question? Jose is one of our staff in community planning.
Right.
Yes, so can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay. So type 1, you're correct. There's no notice requirement for a type 1, but there is for a type 2.
Okay, yeah, which is what my recollection was. So
Correct.
I would be a little leery of making them all type 1 reviews because of that. I think it's not reasonable for, especially for something more elaborate than just a fourplex in a neighborhood. I think it would cause a lot of problems for nearby property owners not to have a chance to at least comment on new development proposals.
Okay, thank you, Stephen.
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next one, 1.2. Develop pre-approved model plans for new middle housing types, including ADU designs that can be built with type 1 approvals. So Nancy, this is kind of, I think, what you were referring to. Anyone want to speak on this one? Nancy?
Yeah, I think, again, I like the idea, but I think it would be good to have the pre-approved models in terms of more of like a broad general prescriptive, not like the specific look, because when I design an ADU, it's per client specific, meaning if they're in a wheelchair versus if they have Parkinson's, then they would be different. So if there was a preset model of that would qualify for type 1 approval, then I may not qualify. You know what I mean? But if it's the construction type and the, insulation value, all of those other things that are to code, if there are some broad general plan that's used as a basis, I think that would allow more flexibility for customization.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I think, I mean, it's not a bad idea. I don't know how much traction the county would get with that and how much it would improve. But if you're talking about pre-approved model plans for middle housing types, you're really talking about the building permitting processing, building review and permitting process. And while it could help, but as Nancy pointed out, I mean, every client is a little bit different. Every piece of property is a little bit different. It might be it might be tough to effectively develop model plans that can be replicated and would be adopted widely. So it's not a bad idea, but it might not get a ton of response.
Okay, thank you. Any other advisory group member? And I see, hi, BK. We're going to save public comments to the end just because we have to get through a lot of material and we want to make sure the advisory group weighs in so that they can keep this going. So we'll get you at back when we're in the big group. Okay, I'm going to move on unless anyone else has in the advisory group has anything. Okay. The streamlined land use engineering and building permit reviews. So expediting or revising the expedited permitting process for targeted residential projects, electronic plan review, review the land use and engineering standards used to review projects and identify if there are opportunities that would promote both efficiency in the review and application process. I already see a hand. Stephen, you want to go ahead and weigh in on this?
Yeah, before providing an opinion, I was hoping you could give a little more specific definition of targeted residential projects.
I think this is like referring to what, as the advisory group, you might want the county to consider as, you know, is it the middle housing types, triplexes, quadplexes, ADUs,
Right.
those types that you're trying to encourage development for.
Okay.
Good question. Thank you.
I have a comment. I swear, I don't know. If somebody could tell me where to raise my hand, I would raise my hand. But for the
Feel-
life of me,
feel
I
free.
do not see the icon.
No worries. I just
So
go ahead
It's
and jump
under
in.
reactions.
it's
So-
under reactions. Okay, so
Yeah.
okay. I was reading reactions to mean after somebody spoke, not.
Yeah,
a
just click on
notification.
reactions and raise hand should be at the bottom of the box.
Perfect. So revising the expedited permitting process for targeted residential projects. So I would say one of the things we really like about operating in the city of Vancouver versus urban Clark County is the streamlined review option for type 2 land use reviews for site plans. And we do that quite a bit. That allows us to front load engineering. We can submit at the same time and go through the process, and we can deliver a project entitlement sometimes 3 months or more ahead of time. County's engineering review is typically a lot more efficient than the city of Vancouver's, but we do like the streamlined process. As it is, Clark County typically won't take the first engineering submittal until after the appeal period on the preliminary land use decision. So that's something that other jurisdictions are doing successfully. It requires the applicant to come in with a fully fleshed out development proposal. I mean, the engineering needs to be essentially done when we come in with a preliminary land use. So hopefully the county is looking at more polished submittals as well. But I like that idea a lot. You know, if you can knock 3-4 months off a project timeline, that's a big impact in my world.
Thanks, Phil. Anyone else on the advisory group?
Yeah, on that second point, supporting the initiative for electronic plan review, are they currently paper and pencil?
I think currently they're still paper submittals. So just trying to improve like that, the streamlining that kind of initiative to allow for that electronic review. I just don't think we have that set up at the moment.
And has the county heard any demand from developers or builders that they want electronic review?
I'll let Phil or Cirque weigh in. I don't know personally. I would assume probably, but I don't know I haven't heard myself.
We'll submit whatever the jurisdiction wants. And I think it works either way. What we found when the city of Vancouver went to 100% electronic plan review, the rollout and staff getting accustomed to working in that medium was kind of clunky, and there were a lot of drop balls and initial delays. It's better now. So I think there's either or is fine, just so long as you know what to expect. in my book.
And the bulleted list here was just some ideas to consider. So if there are others that anyone has more specifics for, please feel free to share on those. Okay, I'm going to move on. Cirque, did you have anything on this one?
No, I was just
Okay.
going to echo what Phil said, that the
Okay.
city rolled out electronic and the learning curve made it kind of more painful,
Okay.
but it's fine now.
Okay. All right. Good to know. Oops. All right. Now we're going to move on to the, environmental review C-2 and the strategies that are listed under this category. And we kind of went over this in the larger group. So use sub-area planning as a tool to ensure new areas of development are built with neighborhood amenities. And you can use the planned action strategy as part of the sub-area strategy. So the second one there, 2.2, talks about that planned action. And we talked a bit about that in the bigger group, where it's a way to do a larger area, do the environmental review for a larger planned area, so that when individual projects come in for development, that environmental review has already been established and reviewed for that type of development. So it takes the onus off that for the developer. C 2.3, I'm going to kind of go through all these three because they're kind of similar, and then have you all discuss. Write code that would provide a SEPA exemption for small scale infill development. Okay, I'll open the floor. Anyone want to weigh in on this? Any of these three?
What is SEPA now?
The State Environmental Protection Act. So it's the environmental review required for impacts that development might have. Phil.
Oh, I got it.
Yay.
I think these are all good strategies. SEPA review is not something that's a huge hurdle. It typically doesn't trip up a project. So the city's used it successfully in several sub areas just to sort of set the stage for development. So I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I don't think that it's a game changer, but it surely can't hurt.
So maybe not a huge priority for developers to want versus other things, or if we're thinking about that priority question.
Yeah, I mean, I have experience with the cities, and you look at where it's had a big impact. Well, it had a big impact with the original Esther Short redevelopment plan, and then the renewed Esther Short redevelopment plan. But at the same time, the city was investing a ton of money in the downtown area. So the planned development ordinance helped a lot. Getting the SEPA out of the way helped a lot, just because it let people know that there was that certainty in the city's commitment. But there was also, a lot of subsidy in public infrastructure as well. Same thing, I think, is true at the Riverview Gateway sub-area plan, the Section 30 sub-area plan. It does provide some level of certainty, but those big heavy lift projects, I mean, it doesn't move I don't think it moves the needle that much.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Anyone else want to weigh in on these environmental review strategies? Cirque, do you have any with what you run into, any issues or?
I just echo what Phil said. I
Okay.
mean, it hasn't for me been a huge issue. It'd be great to have these things. I don't know that it would be great to do. I'm not sure. There's a long list of things we would want. I don't know that it's something that would be great, but it's not, I'd put it in the fine print. I don't think we need a lot of debate on it.
Okay. Okay, thank you. All right, well, it looks like I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next category here, other administrative actions. Consider a time limit or limited supply strategy for the development of certain housing types, such as ADUs. by offering financial incentives or impact fee waivers for the first 10 projects or the first 2 years, something along that lines. What do you think? Good, Phil. All right, go ahead. Oh, is that from before? You're muted, Phil.
Yeah, no, I never unlowered my hand. Sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Do you have anything to share on this one? Do you think this would be something that would encourage developers?
No, I don't think it would encourage developers. I think it would encourage some folks that may have been thinking about putting in an ADU anyway. So it can't hurt. I guess it all depends on what the cost or what the trade-off is. What are we giving up to put this in place, and what's the true benefit?
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Nancy.
So are we addressing this to the developers? What about the mom and pops that want
Yes,
an ADU, right?
of course, of course.
Right, and so something would be great would be like maybe have a reduced assessment or suspend the assessment for the first 5 years so that they can catch up, you know, through what, if they want to build an ADU as mom and pops, that could be really helpful, because if you're putting in the money to build an ADU, then you get assessed and all of a sudden you're, you know, in a financial hardship in order to have an ADU. So that's something to consider, you know, just some kind of a tax incentive or to ease the burden.
Great, thank you.
So I'll agree with Nancy in the sense that for the homeowner putting in an ADU, that's great. I'd put this in a category of, we want this, but we've got so much to get through. I'd put this in the fine print also and just have this, I mean, it's just good policy, do it as a matter of course. This ADUs are not going to solve our lack of affordable housing. ADUs are not going to solve the housing cost problem we've got.
Okay, thank you, Sirk. Anyone else before we move on to the next one?
Can I ask, Sirk, can you expand on why you think that would not be a feasible idea to solve the problem? I mean, it's not the only solution, but it's one of the solutions.
Sure, and I said, I mean, we could put it, I mean, I think as a matter of course, it's worth talking about, and supporting ADUs is fine. It's just, I think when we're talking very large strategy or very big picture strategy on trying to generate affordable and middle income housing, we're spending an awful lot of time talking about, a disproportionate amount of time talking about ADUs as a solution. And I think it's a very small portion. I just don't think we're going to be able to build our way out of our affordable housing crisis with ADUs. And I think it's getting a disproportionate amount of attention.
Okay, so if I may, and I'll just open and close with this one. Yes, I agree with you, because the need is surpasses probably what the people are willing to step up and pay for the ADU. However, at the same time, because I'm serve on the member of Commission on Aging, a disproportionate number of people, I mean, and I represent kind of the elder population, would prefer to stay at home or live on their own property. So it addresses not only the affordability issue, but also like a quality of life issue. So it's not probably not the platform to expand on that, but there is a intrinsic and compelling reason to you know, discuss that as a topic. So, but I really appreciate you like bringing that up.
Nancy, I don't disagree that it needs to be supported. I'm agreeing with you on that.
Okay, thank you both. How about we move on to the next one here? I'm just looking at the time and I know we have a lot more to get through. How about these workshops for ADU potential builders to share information and kind of, you know, get that kind of background or help and support? Is that something that is a priority that would be helpful with the questions that we're to answer? Anyone?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a bad idea. I'm not sure if the county needs to take that on, but they could. So, I mean, I think it sort of goes with 3.1 a little bit.
Okay.
I also know that banks, local banks like Umpqua is very big on lending for ADUs. So that could actually be like a community thing. It's a win-win for them. So I agree. Doesn't necessarily have to come out of the county resources, but the idea of offering educational workshops, I'm all for that.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, next one, create a housing demonstration project or pilot program to test how well a certain new housing type would fit within the community and address community housing needs. Phil, you raised your hand?
Yeah. I like this one a lot. And I like this one a lot, and I'll expand on it a little bit, just because so many of the strategies that we're talking about today and that we've talked about in weeks past, and I know I missed the last meeting on the 27th, you know, providing housing is a complicated matter. There's, you know, getting the right property, getting the financing, getting the product right, and everything else. And what I've been advocating for a couple of years to the city and the county is to take a hard look at their PUD ordinance, their planned unit development ordinance, provide more flexibility within the planned development ordinance, and allow the market to bring other housing solutions to properties. I've got a project in Gresham right now where we're using Gresham's, it's called the, here, hang on. It's called the Innovative Housing Demonstration Projects Code section, where they authorized a certain number of demonstration projects. And they basically said, hey, we're not sure how to solve this missing housing problem, but we know we've got a problem. And so they adopted this code and they said, hey, you bring projects to us, demonstrate to us how it's different than what we already have, how it works and why it works, and we'll consider it. And so we're trying that. I just think that providing an avenue for the market to come to the jurisdiction with solutions that maybe don't fit into the current zoning code box is a good idea. And, you know, you can cut it off at any time. You can revisit it every quarter or every 6 months or something like that. But I think that's a great way to see if there are strategies that emerge from practice that can help.
Thank you. Anyone else?
What does that look like in practice though, Phil? Is it people developing triplexes and condos in specific areas that are designated as pilot project, or is it just specifically proposals?
Well, Gresham's is interesting. I've never seen anything like it. Basically, they're saying, hey, and you can look it up. It's chapter, here, hang on, I had it open a second ago. No, I don't know where it went. Sorry. Oh, here it is. It's chapter, it's section 70300, the Innovative Housing Demonstration Projects. But there, they just have a series of criteria. This is show us something that we don't have that works. And I won't go into the detail. The planned unit development ordinances of the county and the city are a little bit different. They usually require additional, they provide for density bonuses. They require additional open space, creative design, two or three different product types typically. So you're not getting a single product type development. So, I mean, they can be put together in a variety of ways, but it provides flexibility. So I can take an environmentally constrained piece of property that's in a weird location with a weird shape and maybe fit a few different product types into it and come to the city with something that doesn't meet lot coverage, that doesn't meet necessarily underlying density. There's a few ways to approach it.
Could I add to that thought and say that rather than creating a housing demonstration project or pilot, I would just say support housing demonstration projects and pilot programs. Not just one. Let's try lots of different things. And to build on what Phil's saying, let maybe the development community come with some ideas, and then we vet those various creative ideas through demonstration projects, plural, and just have it as an ongoing policy so that we're constantly trying to think outside of the box and solve the problem.
Awesome. Thanks, Sirk. Thanks, Phil. Stephen, did you have something you wanted to add?
Not at this point.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Last one here, or yes, for C3, monitor housing development over time, noting the number of types of units produced, sizes, units, density, parking provided, etc. What's our thoughts on this one?
I don't think the county needs to do that any more than it's doing it now. I mean, it should have information from permitting, but there are commercial services that do that. So I don't know if I'd start a new program. I don't know.
Anyone else? Stephen?
Yeah, I think if you really do, as it was mentioned, I think somewhere before, if you really do sub-area planning to integrate what development types look like over an entire neighborhood, and if that's an ongoing process, then I don't think that you need a separate strategy to monitor housing development. But I think the sub-area plan is an important approach because it provides a sense of, for example, where neighborhood parks are needed. And is, last time I was talking about small pockets of commercial development in residential areas. If this was part of an overall sub-area plan, then it would be something that would be looked at over the course of time, more or less continuously. And then I don't think that a separate strategy like C 3.5 would be necessary.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen. Anyone else? Okay, I'm going to move on. Other strategies. So F1 has to do with legislative advocacy. So encouraging like county council to lobby change in legislation at the state level. So we have the condominium defect liability law, or and then the second one was what Steve had mentioned. We don't really have anything concrete, but are open to hearing any ideas on changes that would support locally owned rental housing instead of out-of-state ownership. Would anyone like to weigh in on either of those? Phil?
Condominiums are a big, complex problem, but they're one of the only ways available today to get people into the home ownership market, to allow people to jump from being in a rental tenure to home ownership, because new homes, whether attached or detached, are so expensive that condominiums are one way to put, at least one rung back in the ladder for home ownership. And I don't know how you get it done, but we would love to build some condominiums, but they typically, in my research, only work for higher end projects. There are a lot of them being built in Washington, but they're higher end projects, and they're calculating the additional risk from the condos, into the project's bottom line during underwriting. And if you're trying to build something that's affordable to a first-time home buyer, it's just not the same model. So I don't know what you do, but Washington needs to get this fixed, because that's one of the only ways I see that people can make that jump from rental tenure to ownership, if that's what they desire to do.
Thank you. Anyone else? Nancy?
Addressing specifically to the F1.2 regarding the locally owned rental housing market, I see this trend of seeing hedge funds coming up and buying up properties and becoming like these robotic landlords. I mean, just basically the bank owning houses. So I mean, maybe, and I don't know if I'm popular, not popular, but like, I think that if it's not a mom and pop that owns the rental housing, we're kind of in danger of like going down a dangerous path. So yeah, I would definitely support legislative changes that would support more local owned, more family owned, rather than these big hedge funds or the banks that would control the rental housing market.
Okay. Thank you, Nancy. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would add to that. I think it's great to support local ownership of rental housing, but I don't think, given how real estate finance works today and delivering large projects, I mean, large projects cost 30, 40, 50, 60 million dollars to deliver. They're valuable real estate assets. I think if we're supporting local ownership and discouraging outside ownership, ultimately, I think that will discourage investment in some types of housing in this area. So I think great to support it, but we have to be careful not to drive out outside investment. That's my take.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Any other member?
So I'll just add to Phil's comment that I don't know that I would want this done at a legislative level. I do think we need to support local ownership of rental housing, but I don't know that a legislative approach is the right one.
Okay, thank you, sir. Anyone else? Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to our next category, F-2, accessibility. The one here, 2-1, has to do with adopting a visitability program, either with voluntary incentives and or requirements, code requirements for the construction of a percentage of new housing units, such as when there are 3 or more units proposed, to include the following visitability standards: no step, barrier-free main entrance, a bathroom and small living area accessible to the main entrance, and 32-inch wide internal doors between the entrance, the bathroom, and the living area for wheelchair accessibility. And I'll open it up. Nancy?
This is my passion. I vote that whatever development that we do, if it's on the ground floor, that it be just by default visitable. Because if you look at the demographics of how many people that are aging, I mean, there's no housing for those otherwise handicapped, or I don't know what the PC word for that is, but so yeah, I think that's a really important thing to address. Oh, and I don't think it necessarily costs any more. I mean, it's not proportionally more, it's just a little bit more to put that into place, make that visitable.
Okay, thanks, Nancy. Anyone else?
I second that. I think it's just with good design. It doesn't cost anything additional, and it allows for all use rather than just able body use.
Thank you, Eric. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on to F-3, motel hotel conversions to housing. Anyone want to weigh in on this one?
Okay, so this might just be an anecdote, but driving Highway 99, I see like those small roadside motels. Is there issues with converting them into like permanent housing, and that's what this would look to address?
Yes, it would look at if there's any impediments for allowing that.
Because absolutely, I mean, I just see, unused property sitting there. And so if we could convert it into housing, it makes sense. But also, what's the desirability of those spaces? And what's the future improvements look like? And could they build off of that? I think those are all questions that would need to be answered. Phil?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it requires the code needs to be looked at and one of the concerns would be, what happens if you do a conversion? Do you have a non-conforming use or residential use in a commercial zone? So there's a lot to look at there. How you implement the building code and all that other stuff. But yeah, if you can get it sorted out, it seems like a good way to potentially have some value add improvements that add quite a number of units. But it can be complicated because, particularly I think because of the potential comprehensive plan and zoning categorization issues.
Nancy?
I have another idea adding to this, and that is there are all these shopping malls that are being vacated. What if we turn that somehow into affordable housing? And you can have restaurants, cafes already in there. And I mean, I know that it takes a lot of retrofit, taking it from retail space to residence, but this is kind of along the same line of like, taking something that's not meant for residents and turning them. So I don't know if that's out of place, but that's an idea.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
I'd also argue that most of these motel hotels are situated close to services. And so it would help us with our, expansion or urban sprawl by revitalizing areas that are closest to services.
Thank you, Eric.
Just, I guess, one more comment on that. I mean, I think in thinking about this, it does relate back to a prior strategy, I think, that was discussed in the last meeting. And that, I mean, converting commercially zoned land to residential uses. So this policy is likely related to that.
True. Okay, Stephen.
Yeah, one thing I think that needs to be considered if you're talking about conversion of commercial, especially motel and hotel structures for residential, is that you need to think about concrete density. And what I mean by that is typically the commercial areas are very short on yard space, plants, trees. And I think that's something conversions would have to include, that sort of conversion to turn some parking areas, for example, into green space that would make those areas, keep them affordable, but make them more attractive as living areas.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on. F4, definition of household. So lots of different codes have definitions of a household, what a household is, or what a family is, or a housing unit is in our development code. So there has been some state law to change and remove the numbers of unrelated persons that may define a household, family, or occupy a dwelling unit. So this is kind of, I think everyone would probably, I mean, it's a state mandate, state law. So we would be using adding this to the list of strategies for council related to updating our definitions. Does anyone have any questions or want to weigh in on this one? Okay. All right, moving on to G, displacement strategies. And I'm just going to go ahead and scroll down to the actual strategies here. G 1.1, monitor or support Vancouver Housing Authority monitoring efforts on regulated affordable housing properties that are nearing their affordability expiration dates. I think Victor talked a little bit about that in the bigger group. Adopt a notice of intent to sell ordinance and explore partnerships and opportunities with community land trusts. I'll open the floor to anyone that wants to jump in on any of these strategies.
So I've got a couple of things. One is to build on what Victor, I think, was saying. So the VHA is going to monitor its own projects And the ones that are, have affordability regulation usually tied to the financing, they're going to know when that regulatory burden goes away or not, and then they decide whether they're going to sell or not. And if they're in a gentrifying neighborhood, the opportunity might be to able to sell one project, make enough money to buy or build 2 additional more. And those decisions are going to have to be made one by one. They don't necessarily help the gentrification or displacement and sort of challenges in a specific neighborhood, but could ameliorate it on a bigger scale. So to build on that, I think what we need is for something like the Washington State Housing Finance Commission, which funds all of the tax credit projects, to be proactive and letting local governments, county and cities, know in a proactive way when certain projects are coming up on the end of their affordability requirements, and then the community can decide whether they're going to step in and buy that in some form or fashion to keep it affordable, or indeed whether it flips to the private market. And that usually only happens in gentrifying areas. So the data's there. Somebody's just got to be proactive about looking for it. I don't know too much about a notice of an intent to sell. It sounds like an interesting idea. And then the idea of community land trusts or other opportunities to buy these buildings sort of would go hand in hand with 1.1. That things are coming offline from their affordability requirement point of view. Then what? You're going to have some sort of a fund or a combination of county, city, community foundation, or what have you. Somebody's got to step in and then buy that and keep it affordable, and then put it into a land trust mechanism or deed restriction or what have you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Okay. Let's go ahead and move down to G-2, also similar to our B5, I guess that note means. Manufactured home and tiny home communities. So county to provide resources and support with the mobile home park preservation and relocation assistance program and mobile home park conversion to cooperative programs. Open it up for discussion on that.
This would be a great place to have an intent to sell. The tricky thing with the mobile home parks is, they're cash cows like mini storage, and they trade hands often without going to market. And mobile home parks, whether they're glamorous or not, are a huge opportunity for affordable housing. The trouble is they trade hands often without going to market, or they get converted into more expensive townhome developments. So anything to support the preservation of mobile home parks or the improvement of ones that need it is great, but it's all money.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on to G-3, tenant and homeowner protections and assistance. Scroll down here. 3.1, continue renter assistant fund programs, support, identify where there are fund distribution equity issues, and implement changes to address those issues moving forward. Any thoughts on that one specifically?
Is this addressing the emergency, like COVID rental assistance, or is this more like Section 8?
I think it's more general renter assistance programs that are in place. Okay, how about support state legislation that invests in affordable housing, rental assistance, and tenant protections?
No brainer.
Okay. Expand existing homeownership weatherization, rehab, and energy assistance grants. And I'll just open it up to the rest of these because they're all kind of similar assistance programs, not similar, but assistance programs. So feel free to weigh in on any of the 6 listed here.
Well, like on the expanding weatherization rehabilitation, what does that do to increase the affordability of housing or to increase the amount of housing available?
Which one? I'm sorry. Would you repeat that, Eric?
Yeah, for 3.3, G
Yes.
3.3 there.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, if we're looking at the scope of what we're looking at here, does that do anything? Does that move the needle in terms of increasing the number of houses on the market or lowering or creating a more affordable market?
I think it helps people that are already in housing that maybe have lower income to keep them in their homes longer, so that it's helping them keep their home weatherized and safe and up to code, so that they're having the income to spend on other life things. So those expanding those, I would assume, applying for a bigger fund for local governments to expand those programs to accommodate more homeowners. So this would be one, a lot of these would be ones that we explore with our local providers, community services, and our agencies that work with these programs.
So that had me thinking real quick, Jackie, could we do expand home ownership weatherization, but could maybe just weatherization in general? Because it reminded me of a nonprofit in Portland that has very successfully in its neighborhood or its service area bought small apartment complexes, and they and to do affordable housing preservation, they buy them and they use a lot of weatherization programs to pay for part of the rehabilitation of those units. It'll pay for a new roof, it'll pay for new windows. And so it helps bring the rehab costs down and preserve those rental units as affordable housing also. So I like the whole idea, but not even to limit it to home ownership.
Great, thank you, sir. Phil gets a thumbs up with that one too, okay. And Nancy?
In regards to the foreclosure assistance, I feel like there's a lot of help to help people get from sinking their ship, like get them out of foreclosure, but we don't necessarily teach them how to stay out of foreclosure, like for the next time. So I feel like there's maybe some like basic fundamental finance wisdom, or how to own a house, or how, you know what I mean? It's like, it's one thing to help them, keep them from going to foreclosure, but what's to prevent them if they're not financially savvy and don't know how all this works, from going into foreclosure if they're not financially responsible. So I would probably add like foreclosure assistance and resources and programs to teach them fundamentals of like home ownership.
Okay, all right, thank you. Anyone else with these 6 here under G3? Okay. G4, regulation of short-term rentals. I think we have one strategy here, and this is the last one. Research short-term rental impacts in the county, and if needed, develop a county policy around short-term rentals. Bill.
All I was going to say is this seems, there are reasons to do that. I don't know, increasing housing supply or affordability, I'm not sure if it's a high priority for those goals. So
okay.
I would rank this as a pretty low priority.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Is there, oh, go ahead, Nancy.
Oh, I know that in Portland, they waived the SDC fee, which can be considerable, up to like $25,000 if you were to build an ADU. That's for short-term rentals. So I'm not sure if if that's something that we should reconsider, because there is a substantial SDC fee on building ADUs for Clark County, if I remember.
Well, we have.
Nancy, are you saying they're waiving the fee for an ADU as a short-term rental?
No.
Like a VRBO, or as a long-term rental?
They're waiving it if it's over 30 days.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Short-term, if it's a short-term rental, then they hit you with the SDC fees, and it's considerable.
Okay, we'll make that note. Okay, well, it looks like we have, I think, a couple minutes, if that's correct, Jen. I think it was 36. Does anyone, with the last couple minutes here, is there anything in these kind of strategies here or category-wise that we didn't cover that you have thought about that's not here? Nancy.
Code for I mean, I'm the ADU person, so to allow ADU building in rural areas that are
Okay.
not competing.
Yeah, and I hear you there. I think with this one, that's we're trying to focus on the Vancouver urban growth area unincorporated.
Okay.
So that's something that could maybe come at another project when we start planning for other things. Okay, cool. Anyone else? Okay, before we go to the next group, feel free, if you think of anything, reach out to any of the project staff, not only with just these categories, but any of the past ones that we've already reviewed. And we're going to go back, and Jen, are you good at reporting back? All right, I'll help you too. I took some notes, and please, if our advisory group members could also, if there's something important you want to share when we report back, please don't hesitate to, okay? All right, cool. All right, I guess that's it. We'll go ahead and go to the large group.
Okay, I think we have everyone back in the room together. Maybe if Jackie and Jenna have a minute or two to share any key observations from your group, let's go ahead and do that now.
Thanks, Steve. Jenna was so kind to do all our notes, so she's gonna give a couple, I think, highlights, and if any one of our advisory group members wants to weigh in on that, please do.
Okay, so a lot of good discussion, a lot of feedback and suggestions on things to consider for a lot of the strategies. So a few items that are standing out to me at the moment are talked a lot about the suggestion to move more residential projects into a type 1 review process. And there's a lot of discussion on, yes, desirable, but let's make sure it makes sense. Which projects does that make sense for? And then also the consideration of neighbors having input on project proposals, which you lose if you switch to a type 1 process. Also a lot of feedback on, process improvements and in terms of reviewing, engineering and building plans, and some suggestions on what's happened with other jurisdictions there. but I think in general support to improve the process. Also got some suggestions on and support for demonstration projects and recommendation to look at what the city of Gresham is doing. And that seems to be a pretty unique approach to allowing folks to propose ideas that are different than what's allowed in current code. Support for, whatever the county can do to support manufactured home parks in their role, what makes sense there. There was support for that. Also, similar support for renter assistance and a lot of those suggestions that had the county in sort of a support role for assistance programs that are available. And then also in regards to some of the ADU suggestions, support as well to make that process easier for people who are interested in building ADUs. I'll stop there. Again, doesn't quite do justice to everything that was said.
Thanks, Jenna. I'm going to point out a few other things that our group thought were very important. Again, it's not comprehensive, but the code changes to allow motel and hotel conversions to housing stood out as an important one. The updating the definition of household, which is more of a bookkeeping thing but has implications, is something, a low-hanging fruit that should be addressed. Working with, we had a lot of talk about the importance of having data and really monitoring existing affordable housing, whether it's subsidized or market rate, so that we have that data and information and monitoring over those over time, so we can respond accordingly if there's changes or gaps that need to be addressed. Same with, I think tied into that is the adopt a notice of intent to sell ordinance. I had several strategies throughout, I think, just talking about monitoring affordable housing units and types and sharing that information so that we have that data to build on. At the end, we asked if there were strategies that we hadn't talked about. There was mention of the repealed infill ordinance and needing to take another look at that and figure out where it could be valid and valuable. Also really focusing on smaller lot sizes and smaller housing that is going to allow us to provide units at the price levels that we think we need to address the gaps in the county's housing at this time. And then again, with the monitoring, looking at residential development proposals and having those proposers, applicants indicate what they're likely to be charging if it's a rent, whether it's a housing price or rental unit. Again, just the more information we have, the better equipped we are to adjust regulations and code and strategies to respond and to the county's needs. So with that, I'm going to share my screen again. And no, let me see if I can find the right one. There we go. And move to our public comment period. So, how to